and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to do the mid-year book freakout tag. So as far as I can tell, this tag originated quite a few years ago now from Ellie at Earl Grey Books and another booktuber called Chammy. I'll link their channels down below, and it has become somewhat of a staple tag in the booktube community. I did this one last year and I'm so excited to be back answering these questions about the highlights and lowlights of my reading year so far. In the first 6 months of the year I have read 52 books already, which is absolutely fantastic because I set my goal every year at 50 books, so anything above 50, so basically the whole second half of the year now is going to be bonus, and I definitely have some new favorite books that I'd love to talk about, as well as some that maybe were a bit of a letdown. So I have a whole stack here that are part of the books that I'd like to discuss, and I also have, of course, lots that I read from the library that I'll just insert the photo of. So without further ado, the first question is, what is the best book you have read so far in 2021? And for this, I like to split it into fiction and non-fiction because I do read and enjoy books from both subcategories. So for non-fiction, it is without a doubt The Far Traveler Voyages of a Viking Woman by Nancy Marie Brown. I talked a little bit about this one in my April wrap-up video. We're following Gudrid, who is a Viking woman whose story is immortalized in some of the Viking-era sagas. And the author is using both that literary information that we have about her, as well as going to modern-day archaeological sites to fill in the gaps about her life story. And this book is just absolutely fascinating. It's written in such an approachable way, but I learned so much about what it was like to be a Viking woman, especially one who traveled to some of the more remote settlements in Greenland, Iceland, and North America. And then there are probably 4 or 5 fiction books that are in the running for the best book of the year. But after lengthy consideration, I am going with The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. And there are a few elements that made this book so special. It is a short classic that follows 4 women from England who pitch in together to rent a castle in Italy for the month of April. And they all have things about their life in England that they are wanting to escape from, as well as very different personalities. This book is beautifully written. It has so many descriptive passages of the gardens and the grounds of the castle that they rent. It really is an immersive reading experience, especially as a springtime read. It also is set in the interwar period, which is a time period that I am finding increasingly fascinating. So there are little mentions of how World War I has affected these women and the society that they are living in. It also deals really wonderfully with these women's journey of self-exploration, and there is major character growth throughout the arc of the novel for all the characters. 2 of the characters are married, and their marriages are in trouble at the beginning of the month, and we get to witness some of the transformation in their relationships over the course of the 4 weeks that they are spending in Italy. Overall, The Enchanted April is just a book that I think will stick with me a long time, and I would definitely see myself rereading in many Aprils to come. Then question number 2 is, what is the best sequel you have read so far in 2021? So I'm going to give a bit of a cheat answer because this isn't really directly a sequel, but I don't read a ton of series that aren't mystery series, so I don't have lots of sequels to discuss. So I'm going with The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, and this book is not directly a sequel to Station 11, but there are some characters that we met in Station 11 that are also in this book, just in a parallel universe from the Station 11 universe, which I think is a fascinating way for St. John Mandel to have approached continuing on some of the character arcs and exploring what might have happened to them in another life. It is written from a variety of perspectives and crisscrosses through time throughout the book. So it's almost a kaleidoscope of perspectives and events throughout the novel. And by the end of the story, it all fits together into one beautiful and haunting tale that I will remember for a long time. Then question 3 is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but really would like to? And I have so many for this question because I primarily get my books out of the library, so I usually end up being almost a year behind in reading books by the time my library acquires either a physical or digital edition, and then I have to wait for my name to come up through the hold list. So there are lots that have come out already this year that I'm excited about and I haven't had a chance to read yet, including The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict, Libertie by Kaitlyn Greenidge, The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec, Cathedral by Ben Hopkins, and We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayyan. Question 4 is, what is your most anticipated new release for the second half of 2021? And again, I'm going to split this into fiction and nonfiction. For nonfiction, it is The Real Valkyrie by Nancy Marie Brown. As you already know, I loved the first 2 books that I have read written by her, which were The Ivory Vikings and then The Far Traveler. And The Real Valkyrie is going to be focused on Viking warrior skeletons that have been identified as female and kind of examining what was the role of female warriors in Viking society. So it sounds like another fascinating book by Nancy Marie Brown that's going to combine legend with archaeology with feminism, and I am so excited. I have actually an e-arc already from NetGalley for this book, and I'm so excited to read it in advance of its release at the end of August. And then for fiction, I actually have just discovered this week that there is an updated translation being published for The Master of Hestviken by Sigrid Undset. And this is a 4-book series that she wrote right after writing Kristin Lavransdatter, and it's also set in medieval Norway. And previous to this, the only English translation was about 100 years old, and it had kind of put me off reading it, even though I have loved the other books that I have read by Sigrid Undset, especially having 4 books in the series, knowing that this would be a significant time commitment. I really wanted to enjoy the reading experience, and I was a bit apprehensive about the older translation. But I have just found out that Tina Nunnally, who did the amazing updated translation for Kristin Lavransdatter, I ripped through the entire 3-book trilogy over the course of a long weekend when I read it a few years back, and she is working through updating The Master of Hestviken. It is being published under some updated titles as the Olav Audunsson quartet, and apparently the first book came out last fall and I have already ordered that one, and then book 2 is coming out this fall, so hopefully by the end of the year I'll have read the first 2 books in that series, and I'm so excited to be back in the world of Undset's medieval Norway. Question 5 is, what has been your biggest disappointment read so far? And that is, without a doubt, The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. I ended up giving this book 1 star, and I think probably more accurately it was a 2-star read, but I was just so disappointed in it because I had looked forward to it so much that it lost an extra star just because of the sheer heartbreak that I felt in not enjoying this book. I feel like the author had so much potential to have this book be an incredible story about a Victorian-era female botanist, and the beginning few chapters were filled with so much Dickensian promise, and I was even hyping this in my mind that it was going to be a 5-star read and possibly one of my favorites of the year. The first couple of chapters were just absolutely incredible. And then around 20% of the way through, it took a turn that I wasn't expecting and ended up being more about her exploring her sexuality and relationship with men than it was about her career as a female botanist. And it was just a bit of a bait and switch that I wasn't expecting, and it wasn't what I was hoping the book would end up being. And it had a lot more graphic passages than I was expecting that made it even feel a bit awkward listening to the audiobook when I was out on my evening walks. I was expecting this epic Victorian-era tale of botany, and instead it was so focused on her sexuality and relationship with men that honestly I'm not even sure if this book would pass the Bechdel test. Question 6 is, what has been your biggest surprise so far this year? And for that I am going with Severance by Ling Ma. I would describe this book as Station 11's cynical, anti-capitalist little sister. It's as if Station 11 mashed with Queenie, mashed with the TV show In the Flesh. But whereas Station 11 left me nostalgic for the present and marveling over the everyday, Severance is really a critique of late-stage capitalism and millennial corporate office culture. I had actually picked this book up first in March 2020, and at the time I think I read like the introduction and a couple pages of the first chapter, and I ended up putting it aside because it was hitting way too close to home for comfort. and wasn't the relaxing kind of read that I was craving. But I'm so glad I picked it back up. It is a brilliant piece of pandemic literature, and it was such a surprise to find out that I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars after having DNF'd it last year. Question 7 is to list a new favorite author, whether debut or new to you, and for that I'm going with Kieran Millwood Hargrave, who wrote The Mercies. This was her first piece of adult fiction, although it looks like she's written some middle grade or YA fiction before. I read this book in January, and it is definitely one that I'm anticipating seeing in my favorite books of 2021. It's set in the 1600s in a remote fishing village in Norway and is based on a true story of when a freak storm came up and ended up killing most of the men from this village who were out fishing at the time, and their boats all capsized. So this society that had previously relied on fishermen to provide for their families now ended up being almost exclusively a female-run society, and they had to figure out new ways to organize themselves and provide for themselves. And in addition to looking at the role of women in society, it also has a really fascinating perspective on the role of Sami people, who are the indigenous people from Norway, and looked at the effects of their ostracization from society as well. I was really impressed with how well researched Kieran Millwood Hargrave's book seemed. She brought in a lot of details about life in a small fishing village and what it must have been like to live so isolated from larger metropolitan centers. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if she publishes any more adult fiction, and particularly adult historical fiction, because I would really love to read whatever she writes next. Question number 8 is, who is your newest fictional crush? And honestly, I don't really have an answer for this one. I don't feel like I really get crushes on fictional characters, so I'm gonna pass on this question. Question number 9 is, who is your newest favorite character from a book? I had a bit of a hard time coming up with my answer for this one. I am tempted to say Gudrid from The Far Traveler, even though she's based on a real-life historical figure. Because her story has been mythologized in Viking-era sagas, she does at times read like a character, and I definitely want to go back now and read the original source material of the sagas, because I found her life story so compelling. I've also really enjoyed Anne Cleeves' Shetland series this year, and the main protagonist of that is Detective Jimmy Perez, and following his character arc over the first 3 books so far that I have read in the series has also been very satisfying, so I would put him down as well as a new favorite character. Question number 10 is a book that made you cry, and for this I am saying When He Was Wicked by Julia Quinn, which is the 6th book in the Bridgerton series. This book's plotline centers around a young widow, and aspects of that part of the plot did have me tearing up at times. Now that I've read all 8 books in the Bridgerton series, I can say without a doubt that this is my favorite book from the series, and that emotional depth that is lacking from some of the other books is, I think, one of the key elements that made me love this one so much compared to some of the others. Question number 11 is a book that made you happy, and for that I have the Mitford series by Jan Karan. I'm absolutely loving hosting the read-along for the Mitford series this year with Kate Howe, Rainey from Rainy Day Reads, and Angie from Literary Laborers, and every single month these books make me so happy. They're such sweet stories and an escape into small town life. I love following the antics of the different townspeople. They're just books that every single month I can count on to make me smile and laugh, and then I have the even greater pleasure of having our monthly live stream discussion of our thoughts on the book, and it has just been such a pleasure to be a part of that read-along. So reading the Mitford series with these other wonderful Booktube ladies is definitely a highlight of my reading year and something that makes me happy every single month. Question 12 is the most beautiful book that you have acquired so far this year. And I have 2 answers for this question. The first is The Death of Comrade President by Elaine Mabanku. This book, I just absolutely love the color of the cover. I think the green and the peach salmon color on this beautiful teal background is stunning. And then kind of the handwriting in black, and then the little dog that has almost like a batik pattern. I just think this is like an absolutely stunning book, and these colors are just very much my aesthetic. So I absolutely love this book, and I'm hoping I get a chance to read it soon. It is set in Congo-Brazzaville, and it follows a young boy whose family ends up getting embroiled in the turmoil following the death of the country's presidents. So it sounds like that combination of kind of political satire and African literature is going to be very much up my alley. The other book that I have gotten this year that I think has an especially beautiful cover is Figures in Silk by Benora Bennett. This is set during the War of the Roses, and I think it's just an absolutely beautiful cover, and it has these beautiful deckled edges. We've got like the portrait of the lady. This part is in metallic, and then the London skyline across the front and back cover. So this is another one that I'm always kind of wowed by when I look at it. And then question 12, and the final question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And of course I have many books that I'm hoping to read by the end of the year. There are a number on my classics TBR that I'm still hoping to get to, with the most intimidating and yet exciting one being Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And there is actually a read-along for this one being hosted by Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf, Christy from Dostoevsky in Space, Victoria from A Musical Bookworm, and Melanie Frenchy Reader, and it's going to be taking place from July to September, and I am planning to join in on this so that I have some encouragement, because I was kind of waffling on whether I should just give up on reading this one this year, because it is just very intimidating. So I'm very excited to be joining in with that read-along. I love my edition of Les Miserables, and it has been on my shelf for so long that it is going to feel wonderful to finally be able to say that I have read it. Another one that has been on my shelves for a while that I'm hoping to get to by the end of the year is Seasons on Harris, A Year in Scotland's Outer Hebrides by David Yaden. And this book will probably end up being part of my Reading Through My Family Tree Scotland TBR, and it is set on the Isle of Harris, which is where my Scottish ancestors come from, and the author went and lived there for a whole year. So it's split into spring, summer, fall, and winter. And I think it'll be a fascinating book. It's got like little illustrations throughout of the different sites and people that he met and were an important part of his year on Harris. And then of course maps in the end pages, which is always a good sign for a good book. So I've been meaning to get to this one forever, and it is one that I think would be perfect to read towards the end of summer, going into fall as the seasons change. And then I also have a couple series that I would love to wrap up by the end of the year. I did finish the Maisie Dobbs series earlier this year, which was something that I had been working on for the past 2 years, and I'm glad to have finished. And I would love to read through the rest of Anne Cleeves' Shetland series this year, as well as finish up Philippa Gregory's Plantagenet Tudor series. So those are some of the other books that I will be prioritizing reading over the next 6 months, as well as, of course, many, many more. So thank you so much for watching my mid-year book freakout tag. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be doing a mid-year goals check-in as well sometime in the next couple of weeks to share more about my progress on my classics TBR, as well as some of the other reading goals that I had set at the beginning of the year. So until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.